Our next speaker comes all the way from Israel, Ben Soffer. And just reading up a bit on Ben, he's previously the managing director of Technion, Technology Transfer, very well-known institution, Technion. He was also CEO of Technion Biomedical Incubator. He was also CEO of Technion Drive Accelerator and chairman of Israeli Tech Transfer Network. So he had 4 jobs, and now he's taking up a position at King's College. I guess you need a rest. What a fantastic career you had in Israel, and we're happy that you bring it to Europe. Could have been a better place considering Brexit, but we can still commute, I guess. So, without much ado, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Henrik. That's very kind. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the organizers. So, a couple of years ago, I took my family to a trip in northern Italy, Bologna, Padua. Probably many of you know this is where university was invented 800, 900 years ago. And the notion at that time was to do teaching at the university because that's where the professors were housed. That was where knowledge was housed. If you fast forward 800 years, universities needed to reinvent themselves, and they started to do contracted research because industry didn't have the facilities and the expertise. Today, we are in the midst of the third wave where universities need to reinvent themselves, and this has been going for at least for the last 40, 50 years, and this is the era of technology transfer. And the concept is that universities that will not be able to demonstrate their impact on the marketplace by creating jobs, by creating companies, will become much less relevant. There are so many ways, other ways to gain knowledge, and technology transfer is becoming key. Now, several years ago, we celebrated the 200th birthday of Darwin, and we all know what Darwin said, that not the stronger survive, but the one who is most adaptive to change. And this is true for countries. Now, Israel, in that sense, has been very, very fortunate. You know, we started with agriculture. Very quickly, we moved into other areas following the French embargo. The defense industry started to develop. Then we had the electronic industry. And we shift very, very quickly like basketball player. You know, we identify an opportunity, we run for the ball, and as soon as we see another opportunity, we change direction. Sometimes we change directions too quickly, like Elsint with MRI. Elsint actually discovered kind of MRI, and then it was gobbled out by GE and Siemens and other companies. So this has been, you know, the development of Israel for many, many years. Now, in order for a country to be able to reinvent itself, it needs institutions that know to do exactly the same. And this represents all of us in this room. Our institutions need to reinvent themselves. Okay, so if we look at the Technion, back in the 60s, the leaders of the Technion decided to set up an aeronautical faculty. Nobody knew if the country will exist. There were, of course, no aeronautical industry to talk of. So where will the graduates go to work? Nevertheless, the leaders of the Technion set up this faculty, and today it's one of the leading faculties in Israel. Now, before I jump into the presentation and the number, I would like to emphasize that the key role, the way we do technology transfer, is using entrepreneurs. So we put a lot of emphasis on attracting entrepreneurs into the marketplace and using them as agents of the marketplace within the campus. Because we all know that most of what our researchers develop are technologies looking for a problem. And if you have a very skilled entrepreneur, he can look at the technology and say, gee, he or she, this can be applied for this and this application. Why don't we try this? So we engage them very, very actively, and we compensate them very, very generously, mostly with equity. Now, if we look at the global landscape of technology transfer, this is taken from 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And it's quite remarkable. You see that the ecosystem, the global ecosystem of innovation is changing very, very rapidly. And what's interesting, that 4 or 5 years ago, major geographies were not represented in this slide. Beijing, you know, the whole Far East. And if you fast forward to today, look who's ranking ahead of Tel Aviv, ahead of Boston, Beijing. And this is taken from recent year, and you can see the changes. So today, every geography that respects itself develops, you know, an ecosystem of innovation. Everybody talks about the decline of the United States, and I argue that it's not the decline of the United States what we talk about, it's that the rest of the world is coming up, is awakening to the notion that the key is in innovation, in SMEs, in startups. Now, when we talk about technology transfer, I don't need to dwell into this too much. We all know the challenges. There's difficulties in assessing costs, what the market might bear. Buyers don't know what they're willing to pay. Dynamics of the marketplaces are no difficulty in assessing the cost of goods, the margins, the savings, the competitive landscape. So on the business side, there's a lot of challenges. But what strikes me most is the issue of IP. The issue of IP, the period required to develop the IP, and hence the remaining life of the patents to be developed is unclear. What does this mean? That means something which is very simple. We, in general, take 3-year-old boys and we dress them up in a 40-man-year-old suit. We take technologies which are not ready. They are not ready to be commercialized. But nevertheless, we patent them. But we patent them because we don't have any other choice. Because the alternative is that it will be published. And some of the most amazing things, I can talk about the Technion, but I'm sure that in each of your respective organizations, you have these war stories of technologies that made a tremendous change, but were never patented. For example, there was the discovery of ubiquitin, which is how cell labels protein for destruction. The inventors, the developers, the researchers got a Nobel Prize at the Technion, but it was never patented. Later on, you know, a company took the concept and developed Velcade and, you know, and other drugs, Millennium Pharmaceutical, but that's another story. But we commercially didn't see any value out of it. Not that I'm saying that the value is in money, forget it. The value is in many other things, but commercially it wasn't registered as a technology transfer, you know, activity. The Ziv-Lempel algorithm, how you condense information, also was invented at the Technion, was never patented. So the issue of increasing the level of openness of our institutions to commercialization, to patenting, is key. Because it's a total prerogative of the researchers to decide whether they wish to file a patent or not. And if you do not file a patent, nobody will invest the $1 billion that is required in order to develop a drug. It's plain and simple. But you have this IP issue that we filed very early on. And then, as soon as the market catches up, we have 5 years left in the patent, 3 years left in the patent. And this is another reason why we chose very actively not to go down the route of only royalties, but rather equity. Because a lot of the value is captured in equity. And the investors and the people that take this technology make, you know, profit essentially out of equity before there's even a product. And in most cases, there is no product. When you talk about technology transfer, there are two main terms, as we all know. There's technology readiness and there's investment readiness. And here is, you know, this is taken from NASA, I'm sure all of you know. Most of us are here, level 1 or 2, basic principles, observe and report, and technology, concept and or application formulated. Industry is interested in level 7. So levels 3, 4, 5, and 6 are what we all refer to as the Death Valley. And the challenge that we all face, how do we cross this Death Valley? And this is something that we will discuss today. Another challenge, again, just to give you some color, is this one taken from the US. I'm sorry if it's a little bit outdated. What it tells you is that 15 schools in the United States generate 70% of the income in licensing. Just 15 schools. It's embarrassing. And by the way, the names are changing and are changing rapidly. And this is a snapshot of Stanford. Stanford, the holy grail of technology transfer. They patented from 1970 until 45 years later, I think 2015. And they discovered that they filed 10,000 patents. How many patents generated income of more than $1 million? 77. How many patents generated income of more than 100 million? Just 3. So we are in a very, very risky business. We are in an extremely risky business. I mean, if you were to invest in this, you would probably not invest. And this is why the measurement of capital, of how much money we draw, is not the right metrics for us to use. The right metrics is how many companies that we have spun out, how many people they employ, how many researchers are involved in technology transfer, especially the young researchers, etc. So I don't want to drive this point much further, but just to complete the description of the challenges. So this is, again, taken from the US. And in 2014, they made a survey of the active licensing agreements. And they had about 10,000. And just 2 produced income exceeding $1 million. Just 2%. So again, the numbers are extremely telling. This is taken from Israel, showing the success rate of our startups. Israel is recognized as, so to speak, the startup nation, blah, blah, blah. But the truth of the matter that most of our startups fail. So if you talk about technology transfer via startup formation, the truth is that most of these startups fail. Here you see in green the startups that actually, so to speak, make it. But between 1999 and 2014, this is the number of startups that were formed, about 10,000. The numbers are now much higher. There are about 1,000 new startups every year in Israel, which is per capita is probably highest in the world. But the numbers of companies that actually succeed is extremely, extremely small, and we have to recognize this. One final challenge, before I close this chapter of the challenges, are, of course, the funding issues. So here you have leading universities in the United States. This is taken from 2017. Again, I'm sorry, it's a little bit outdated. Here, how much they spend on research. So you see leading universities in the United States, University of Michigan, $2.2 billion. MIT, including Lincoln Lab, is $1.5 billion. I'm sure that the universities represented in this room, the research budget is much smaller. So we have to make sure that we compare apples to apples. If you take the accumulated budget of all Israeli universities, and we have 6, it is less than half of the research budget of MIT. So Technion was about $90 million. Weizmann Institute, Hebrew University, probably another 120, Tel Aviv University, and Hebrew University, So roughly $500 million accumulatively. But nevertheless, the income generated, and we'll discuss later, is very, very high. And all leading Israeli universities have at least one FDA-approved drug in the market, which is quite remarkable. So Technion has Azilect for Parkinson. Hebrew University has 2 main drugs, Doxil and Exelon, Exelon for Alzheimer's and Doxil for cancer. Weizmann Institute, of course, has Copaxone and Rebif, both of them for multiple sclerosis. One tiny research institute is controlling 60% of the multiple sclerosis market. Copaxone was selling for $4.5 billion. And that, again, drives the point of the importance of patenting. And all Israeli universities are extremely aggressive about patents. And I'm saying this again because I know that there are universities that believe that patenting is not important. And I argue that in life sciences, it's key. If you take the greatest breakthrough, the core technology is protected by 2, 3, 4 patents. The molecule itself, if it's a small molecule. In IT, you invest not in the technology, but rather in the team. So our philosophy was much more lenient when it came to IT. We would release it. We would, come up with many other. But when it came to life sciences, we were extremely aggressive, and we would patent very, very broadly. So here you see the income that each institution is generating. So, Stanford, which is here, spending close to $1 billion, was generating about 95. So if you look at the numbers again, it's not that great. MIT, by the way, spends 1.5 billion, and they generate about 50 or 60, if I'm not mistaken. We were generating about 35 for the past almost 10 years, so which is a third, more or less, of the research budget of the Technion, which is quite telling. So how do we overcome all these challenges? So first of all, it was discussed, strategy. The honest truth is that we were developing our own strategy. Managing a university, somebody compared it to cows. I prefer to compare it to cats. It's essentially a one big WeWork, but you are herding cats. And the idea is that we need to develop our own strategy and our own tactics. And this was what we employed at the Technion. So if this is Technion or Israeli University Research, and when I talk about Technion, it's mostly, the same goes for many other universities. If this is Technion Research, then we are the tugboat. Our role was to make sure that the research finds its way out of the port of the Technion as quickly and as effectively as possible. And the issue of speed is critical. The issue of speed is critical, and universities are so slow, And the entrepreneurs and the investors cannot tie themselves to a decision-making process which is too convoluted, too unclear. And this is something that we have to address very, very quickly. So that's why we were formed essentially as a company. We try to distance ourselves from the decision-making of the process and to have a very, very clear mechanism and being very, very responsive. And I will get back to the issue of speed, because this is the most critical element for any startups. So this is how we discussed before the Death Valley problem. This is how we all know the Death Valley. But then, in the winter of 2003, something very interesting happened in the Death Valley. It was raining. So in the spring of 2004, this is how the Death Valley looked like. So my point is that the Death Valley is not dead. The Death Valley is just dormant. And you need to, invest resources to water it. And water it means funding, and water means talent, entrepreneurs. So going back to the entrepreneurs issue, we would make a hell of a lot of effort to attract entrepreneurs. We would have an entrepreneur in residence program. We would even pay entrepreneurs to come and serve as kind of entrepreneurs in-house to look at the technologies and help us in the process. Building a business is like sending a spacecraft to space. The first 10 minutes that you pull away from gravity consume endless amount of energy. And somebody needs to invest the energy into that process. And that somebody is not the TTO. That somebody is usually the entrepreneur. The technologies are simply not ready at that stage to be absorbed and taken as is by industry. They have to go through another maturation phase, which is outside the university. And once there's a company, there's a CEO, there's a board, there are bylaws, you know who's making the decision, the whole language changes. So we were trying, even prematurely, to push the technologies into the arms of incorporations. Sometimes it was done prematurely, but then we made sure to install in the caveats a condition that we will be able to retrieve the technology if and when it fails. Now, the problem with entrepreneurs is that universities tend to attract not the best and brightest. I mean, let's be honest, that's part of the problem. But in a university setting, you actually need very, very strong entrepreneurs. Why? You need people that both their left brain and their right brain are developed. They can talk to the scientist at eye level and gain their respect, and at the same time talk to investors and, and get money. And this is a tough job. So we had several occasions where we mismanaged the process, actually one or two, and we attracted the wrong entrepreneur. And usually we do it in a very gradual way. We would give them an option. The option will kick in once they meet a milestone. The milestone is raising capital, et cetera. But in that case, particular case, we didn't do this. And then the entrepreneurs, in many cases, they fail. They look around the table and they say, that's not my fault. That's somebody else's fault, right? And they say, okay, so who is to blame? And of course, the university is to blame because we have deep pockets. So it's true, we do have deep pockets, but guess what? We have very short hands. So this particular case, actually got litigated, believe it or not. The guy actually sued us, and by the way, me personally, because I was director. I did the big mistake of becoming a director in a startup to which I licensed the technology. Never, a big no-no. Never become a director. The most you can be is an observer, but that's another story. But it was actually litigated, and just to clean this mess up took so much resources that it was definitely not worth it. And the argument was that we deliberately failed him. So the way for commercialization, the problem is that there's no one size fits all. The way there is so complicated. You can do in one technology a licensing deal and it will make perfect sense. You can do an equity deal. In some deals we took an exit bonus, which is a great invention, but the problem is that many investors don't like it. You set up the company that you build to fail because you think, wow, I'm so smart. I put this, I installed all these caveats into the agreement, and I took so much equity and so much royalty and this and that. But at the end of the day, they will not be able to get and to attract investors. So what's the point? So the point is to make agreements. Our concept was not to maximize each and every deal that we did. Our concept was to maximize the number of deals what we did, because at the end of the day, it's a lottery game. We never know. We had technologies that I was sure that they were rubbish. And they became, the best thing after sliced bread, and vice versa. So you really never know, but you have to be very agile and to have very, very clear mechanisms. So when the entrepreneur comes to talk to you, they want to know exactly what is the deal that you offer. And here we have, a few examples of the entrepreneurs that we worked with, and we attract them, by the way, through network, through events, and many others. And here I will just give a couple of examples. Professor Ron Kimmel in Technion's computer engineering department developed a technology with two ex-Russian scientists, PhD students. As you can tell, they are two identical twins. They came, in Israel there was a wave of immigrants in the 1990s. Israel actually almost doubled its population. We were at the time we were 4 million, so 20% actually, and we absorbed 1 million people. Imagine the United States, receiving 70 million people just in 1 year. But it was the best thing that happened to Israel. They were highly educated, very disciplined. Sometimes they were educated in areas that are totally irrelevant for Israel. Yeah, but that's another story, forestry and all this stuff. But still, they were very highly educated, and these guys were 1 year old at the time. Fast forward 25 years, and they were developing this face recognition technology that can tell the difference between two identical twins. Voila. We were trying to commercialize this technology to big startups, as access control, homeland security, all this, and we were failing miserably. One day, this guy, Sagi Ben Moshe, came. He did his master's with Professor Kimmel, and he says, let me take a stab at this. Let me try. So I said, okay, why not? We licensed the technology to him. He committed to raise $2 million. It was an exit bonus deal, 5%, and additional 8.3%. Up to a minimum of $2 million that he raises. The guy raised $1.999 million. And within less than 2 years, he sold the company to Intel for a significant amount. And the story here is not about the money. The story is that he said, I want to take it to a totally different direction. And the direction was hand gesturing. So it was something totally outside what we considered as the right application for this technology. And this is an example of what I discussed. Here we had another technology developed by Professor Gerhard Neufeld, and he discovered a gene that regulates a certain enzyme, and the assumption was that if you're able to silence that gene, you'll prevent cancer from becoming metastatic. Nice. The only problem that this patent was about 10 years old, and we were literally about to drop it. And then this guy, Peter Vaslasler, came. He's actually Belgian by origin, but he moved to the US, and this is how you see that entrepreneurship and startup formation is also becoming global. And he said, he phoned me up and he said, look, I stumbled upon your patent. Can I take a license? Sure, he said. Literally the next day he came over and we signed, an option agreement. And I forgot all about it. It was done like very, very quickly. And again, the issue of speed. The guy raised $15 million. And again, this is something that he couldn't have raised anywhere in Israel because we didn't have at the time. And this is only available in ecosystem like, or at least at the time, like Silicon Valley. He discovered the molecule that actually does the work. And within less than 3 years, he sold the company for several $100 million. We had 6 products for fibrosis, cancer, etc., in clinical trials with Gilead. And this was very, very nice. By the way, all of them eventually failed, but that's another story. So the takeaway message here, again, is that an ecosystem, for it to succeed, it's not an adding game. It's not an adding formula. It's a multiplication. So as long as you have one item in this formula, which is 0 or close to 0, the total outcome will be 0. So in life sciences at the time, we didn't have $50 million to develop, molecules and it was done much, much better in a different location. And this is something that we do very actively. By the way, all the Israeli tech transfer, we license technologies to wherever they can be best commercialized. Here is another example. Professor Dror Selectar, he developed a polymer that can be polymerized in situ using ultraviolet light. Nice. And the application here is cartilage repair. Again, it was very, very basic. We brought in an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur developed a company in our incubator, which, by the way, is a must. I think today we see convergence of the financial world and the academic world. Many of the universities that I visit, they have financial tools because they cannot be dependent upon, the private sector. Already 10 years ago, we developed what we call a preemptive rights fund. We took $10 million from the Technion endowment. I told the president of the Technion, look, it doesn't make sense. We start all these companies, and then we get diluted to nothing. So we took $10 million. We set up this fund. It's called the Technion Preemptive Rights Fund. And whenever there was an investment in one of our portfolio companies, we will bring it to the fund, and normally we will exercise our preemptive rights in the companies. It's like a must tool for any university that engages in commercialization. Then we set up a meet, which I was also managing, actually it was a donation, a $40 million fund to do only medical devices. And then we had the drive to do, it was a $10 million fund, actually accelerator, to do IT. But the universities have to develop their own muscles. We have to develop our own muscles. We cannot be reliant on outside because, as we all know, the major dilution takes place when this company is worth $500,000. And then somebody comes, pays $500,000 and takes 50% of the company, and here you go. So again, this company now is in clinical stage and is doing extremely well. So in my last position, in parallel to being at the Technion, I was also the chair of the ITTN. The ITTN is an organization that comprises all the Israeli universities and hospitals. Essentially, it's a virtual organization, so we have no employees. It's all volunteers. But the network was established in 2014, 15 members, 9 universities, 6 hospitals, and these are the numbers of employees, but not in ITTN, but accumulatively in all the TTOs in Israel. Here you see a snapshot of 2018, which we prepared. So over 1,000 invention disclosures. And the invention disclosures is very, very important because, again, it measures the level of openness of the institution to commercialization. We had one faculty, which I mentioned earlier, aeronautical engineering, and guess what? We didn't receive almost any invention disclosures from the Faculty of Aeronautical Engineering, which is apparently one of the best in the world. And we asked ourselves why. And the answer was very simple. We were not getting invention disclosure because the aeronautical engineering faculty became subordinate of the Israeli Ministry of Defense. So they became spoiled. They became addicted to the easy funding that was available through the Ministry of Defense to this faculty, and this easy money is extremely dangerous for commercialization because it tends to keep the research within the university and it never goes out. I mean, it goes out. There are many other of technology transfer, but to very, very specific needs. Here you see the numbers of patents filed. At the Technion, at the end of my tenure, we had close to 1,000 families, and Technion is relatively a small university, 550 faculty members. Here are the number of licenses, option agreement, again in 2018, consulting agreement, sponsored research agreement, and spin-outs. And here you see the breakdown into between domestic partner and international partners, and Israel being such a small country, there's a lot of collaboration that is going with outside partners. And here you see, a deeper dive into the patent filings, the spin-outs, etc. Again, divided between the Israeli universities and hospitals. What you see here is that, again, many of the Israeli universities and hospitals are engaged in building their own capabilities for commercialization with regard to starting up their own funds, their own incubators. Many of the universities realize that entrepreneurship is not a gift. It's something that can be taught. So whether you are a student for medicine or chemistry or whatever, you can take and you shall take courses in entrepreneurship because you need to be able to invent your job. And this is, how we prepare. Now, many people say, how come Israel is so good in entrepreneurship? And I tend to be a bit cynical about this because it's an all question of alternatives. So here in Europe, in the United States, if you are the best scientist, the best student in electrical engineering, and you graduate, you can go and, they ask you, what would you like your career to be? Well, I would like to go work for Siemens or Merck or, and retire when I'm 65, or Mercedes or what have you. In Israel, we have just 10 companies that sell over $1 billion. So we have Teva, which is in a big trouble these days. And you have all the defense-related companies. Then you have the Dead Sea companies. And then you have Checkpoint. But in general, Israel is very bad at, building big companies. We didn't manage this process too well. Checkpoint is actually an exception because we were able to discover a niche and continue to dominate it, almost 30 years later, network security. But this is very unusual. The Israelis get very, impatient, and they sell their companies very, very, very early on. And this is something that we are, to be honest, everybody talks about the brain drain, but in Israel we are not too worried. We believe in brain circulation. They go to the US, they go to Europe, and then they come back, and eventually the whole ecosystem benefits from this kind of circulation. So what we see here, that many of the universities, like this is Tel Aviv Ventures, have developed their own pockets to allow themselves a certain degree of independence when it comes to commercialization. And this is very, very important. Now, I stress the issue of speed, and if you bear with me, there is a short video clip I wanted to share with you that demonstrate the importance of speed and collaboration. And this is taken from the Ferrari competition. And the question is, and I pull it to the audience, how long do you think it takes for a team to change the wheels of a Ferrari car? Any guess? Formula, yeah. 2.5 seconds, wow. Here you have it. So it's 2.5 seconds. And you are absolutely right, you're almost there. So 2.1, which is quite remarkable. But the issue of being, working in teams and in a very coordinated way, I think is key. So Henrik, before we turn the floor to some questions, I have a quick video clip of ITTN. Again, I beg your forgiveness. It's a little bit outdated, but it will give you some color.
Diverse research activity is taking place in 12 Israeli scientific centers, from Tel Hai in the north to Beersheba in the south. Research topics include medical devices, computer science, robotics, agriculture, chemistry, clean technology, and nanotechnology. Thousands of scientists generate ideas that either develop into successful startup companies or gradually mature at the R&D facilities of one of the world's leading companies. Biotechnology. Hundreds of scientists and physicians take up the challenge of pharmaceutical development to find a cure for serious diseases such as cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, and others. These efforts have produced medicines such as Copaxone, Ozilect, Exelon, and Doxil. These drugs are now available to patients in over 150 countries worldwide. Clean technology, clean tech. Research in Israel varies and encompasses many fields. Clean and efficient renewable energy, desalination, purification, and improvement of water quality, energy conservation. Developments that were initiated in Israel's academic labs now play a major role in global technology and decrease our dependence on oil. Agriculture. Scientists at plant sciences institutes have increased various crop yields by hundreds of %. These developments have made crops more resistant to various pests and extreme environmental conditions, and have provided them a much longer shelf life. Tobacco leaves are currently being used to develop an innovative method for human tissue reconstruction. Scientists are successfully dealing with the challenge of developing ecological pesticides. Israel's leadership in agricultural research translates directly into increased export. Medical devices. Complex spinal surgery performed by a robot. Fast sealing of wounds and cuts on the battlefield or at the scene of accidents. State-of-the-art imaging devices. A membrane for wrapping fractured bone that accelerates bone-building processes. Revolutionary devices for rehabilitating the disabled. These are only a few of the developments conceived in Israeli universities and clinical research institutes, which are now global stars in the field of advanced medicine. Nanotechnology. In academic nanotechnology laboratories, innovative ideas are translated into unique products in a variety of fields, minimizing the processors of the future, preserving their power, while decreasing their energy consumption. New drug delivery methods, innovative lubricants, glass printing, revolutionary chips for advanced industries. Top quality technological products are currently being developed in research labs across Israel. Israel's research capacity is the greatest resource at the country's disposal, serving as the building blocks for driving the state of Israel towards a future of advanced medicine, leading agricultural technologies, innovative new materials, and clean energies. The technology transfer company's proven ability to apply the advanced research results to industrial development is an unprecedented Israeli success story on a global scale.
So I will conclude by saying that you can tell a lot about a country by looking at your culture heroes. And we are here, representing 35 countries. And the culture heroes for many years in Israel were the generals. For the first 30 years, Israel was fighting for its survival, so to speak. So the generals were the culture heroes. For the last 30, 40 years, the culture heroes are the entrepreneurs. People that have built industries like Gil Shved from Checkpoint and Steve Wertheimer and many, many others. And this is a cultural issue, so the young generation look up to them, and if you find, a young electrical engineer and you ask them, what would you like your career to be, they would say, we would like to build our own startups and control our destiny. So I will sign off with a little story, Henrik, if I have, three guys, just, to demonstrate that we believe that we are not only good in high tech, but we are also good in many other things. So three guys were caught up in Afghanistan by ISIS, and they were sentenced to death. Ifat, I think you know these stories. So they received the last bequest, and so they asked an American, an Irish, and an Israeli guy. They asked the American, what would you like to have as your last request? So he said, I would like to have a big hamburger with a lot of French fries and ketchup and mayonnaise, etc. If that's what you want, so be it. They asked the Israeli, what would you like your last request to be? So he said, I would like to make a presentation about my startups and, and raise money. And then they asked the Irish guy, and what about you, sir? So he said, just kill me before the presentation of the Israeli. Thank you.
So you get another chance of thanking Ben, because we intentionally left some time from Q&A, and I promised Ben a very inquisitive and active audience, so don't fail me here. Questions from the floor. I'll bring the microphone around. Anybody? Come on. Otherwise, I force you.
Hi, I'm Suraj from the Netherlands, Wageningen University. I see a lot of nice numbers, but these are all positive numbers. I would like to see what are the failure rates, like exactly how, what are the challenges that you face in the failures, and what is the money that's spent in those failures and all those things. So, because there's a lot to learn from there also, and how much of these resources are going out.
Yeah. Well, if we look at the numbers, so if I drill down into our activity, then we would spend, like on the patents, we would spend a great deal of money on patenting, but a very small fraction, it would be maybe 10–20% will actually find its way not into commercialization, but into a start of a commercialization via a startup. But these are, I think, the industry numbers. And you file patents for reasons which are totally exogenous, outside, because you want to commercialize this technology. You file patents. So this is on the side of, I think the difficulties are that we faced in all universities are organizational, the push and pull. Universities are extremely hard to manage. They are managed from underneath, by the faculty, essentially. They managed a little bit top-down by the management of the institutions. And in many cases, they are managed from the outside by the donors and sponsors that think that because they donate money to the university, they can actually tell the university what to do. So it's an extremely, and we, the tech transfer, are essentially not the core business of the university, and this is a main challenge. We are not perceived as a core business because the core business is teaching and research. So they treat us like an ancillary business. Okay, you know, let them play a little bit, and if they make some money, we will go and tell the whole world how good we are, and if they don't, we'll shut up about it. But they don't see it yet as a core business, and this is something that needs to be changed. Thank you.
Since nobody's willing, I'll actually good. But I have a question as well.
Please, Andrew.
Capital growth and job creation.
Yeah.
You're actually at least hinting that capital growth is what we aim for, because you talk a lot about exit, but job creation. And coming from a small nation like Sweden, I see the similar challenges as Israel. How do we create jobs in our nations when it's really about growing capital for the investors?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the startups, and that's a great question, Henrik, because I took a deep dive into this, and what we found out is that companies that grow in universities, because it is such a long process for them to grow and leave the university, and because it's such an organic growth, because it's the PhD students and the professors, and they take money from the government, their ability to leave the country is reduced significantly. So we have Mazor, which started, by the way, at the Technion, like 15 years ago. I remember a time, well, they started a little bit before I came, but nobody wanted to invest a dime in this company at ridiculous valuation. Eventually, they were sold like 6 months ago to Medtronic for $1.6 billion. It's a robotic-aided surgery device. Nobody wanted to invest a dime, but they employ hundreds of people in Israel. And this is true to many companies that come out of universities. They don't leave as quickly as other companies that are funded by the VC guys, that all they want to do is have an exit so they can raise their next fund and get the management fees that they're so used to. And that's why, for us, the VCs are not the partner to finance our ventures. And this is why we were forced to start up our own funding, because there's a synchronization problem between us and the VCs. They operate in a window of 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and they need to exit and raise their next fund. We operate in a window of sometimes 10, 15 years. So we need patient money, and patient money is either our money or government money, and government money ties you down to the country where you started, in most cases.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I'm here. I'm Sandra, and I'm interested in knowing how much of your success in Israel is driven by government policy, and how much do the technology transfer offices influence that policy, and how?
Well, the Israeli government usually does makes terrible decisions, but in this case, they actually acted very well, because 30 years ago, they started a program called Yozma, and they started the incubator. So you see a government program that was initiated by the government. Yozma was a one-by-one, a matching program to start the VC industry in Israel, which they did, by the way. And today, this is an industry of $6 billion US dollars per capita. Israel, in venture capital, is the richest country in the world, which is quite amazing. $6 billion in venture capital. All of Europe combined, and we didn't go into China, etc., is about 15, maybe a little bit more now, and this is before the Brexit. So the Israeli government did well in building the venture capital industry and building programs to support this interaction between academia and the marketplace. So it was under the chief scientist. Now it's the Israeli Innovation Authority, they are called. But they now have a relatively small budget of $450 million. When they started about 30 years ago, they were essentially 100%. Now they are less than 5% of the total venture capital market in Israel. But when they started, they played a critical role, and they continue to go upstream towards academia. So you see more and more funding going towards applied research in academia. Still, you don't want academia to turn into, a Fraunhofer, because this is not our role. But if we talk about Fraunhofer, so essentially in Israel, you have 5,000, 6,000 Fraunhofer, because each company is essentially an applied research tiny institute, which gets funding, from different sources, but that is generally the concept. So it's a fleet of speedboats roaming the seas, looking for opportunities. And yesterday they did medical devices, and today they do cyber, and tomorrow they will do nano, and they just shift from one area to another where the opportunity is. They are extremely dynamic. And this is what is important today for global ecosystems. Yes?
Hi there, Katrina Creeley from the Health Research Board. So we're Health Research Funder in Ireland. Very interesting talk and very good figures, activity levels coming out of the hospitals. What are the kind of key success factors of working with the hospitals to get this amount of activity?
Well, the hospitals in Israel, like all the major ones, are almost government funded. All of them have technology transfer companies that are pretty independent. And they turn the hospitals not a place where you just treat people. The whole concept of the hospital, like essentially the biggest one, like Tel HaShomer, is that it is a place where you create innovation which is related to healthcare to better treat the patients. So the mindset is not just, okay, let's treat patients. The mindset, how can we help develop the next medical device, the next drug, etc. And the concept that is, I think, very prevalent here in Europe, that in a hospital, the main activity is just to treat patient, is different. It's to treat patients, and like many of the physicians within the hospitals are engaged in research, within a university, outside the university, just inside the hospital, etc. And there are many programs by the government to support this kind of link and commercialization activity that is done, within the hospitals.
Andrea Basso from Nanotechnology. I think you hit the nail when you said that if you don't get commitment from the management of the university, technology transfer it's not going to happen, and that is a fact. But what are the solutions? What are the recipes that you can put in place so that management get committed? Because on one side, technology transfer generates revenue that is volatile, changing time, and is very difficult to predict how it goes. While university is used to have European projects, regular funding that comes in and somehow guarantees a basis of regular funding for the universities. So what should we do so that the management of the university can get more convinced that this is a source of income for the university that is of value. I mean, the US model is not easily transferable, I think, to Europe. This is my experience. I've been 17 years in US and did a lot of patents with large companies over there, and it doesn't seem to apply the same mentality. So what should we do for Europe in particular?
I think it's an excellent question. First of all, change the mentality in the sense of they need to have skin in the game. They need to realize that they need to communicate a message to the faculty, especially the young ones, that commercialization is important. And for many years at the Technion, if you were engaged, if you are researchers, were engaged in research, they will look at you in a funny way, even at the Technion. And we changed it, but if you go up for promotion, like tenureship, they will look, okay, how many publications, how many citations, nobody looked at the patents. But if you have a patent that was approved and accepted, so we were, making the argument that this is at least as good as having, a good article in Nature. And then, having programs and having funding and having, vehicles to support A, patenting, and B, the companies that you spin out. So there's a lot of work to be done internally. And then, unfortunately, technology transfer is a contact sport. You cannot sit in the office, send emails to this black hole and expect the campus to respond. You have to go and meet with the researchers and engage them and have them push their own management because universities are, I think, the only organization left which is self-managed still. So I agree with you. And, using who the university listens to, who the managers, the heads of the university, and we used to exert a lot of influence from the outside in order to have the management, so to speak, of the Technion listen.
I have a couple of quick questions to round up. And maybe this is a nasty one, but looking at your picture of entrepreneurs, I might be prejudiced, but it looks like mostly men. Where are your female entrepreneurs?
I think they are underrepresented in the university in general. Like if you look at the breakdown of the Technion, maybe 20% of the students are female. And they are, unfortunately, they are underrepresented in the sciences. They do amazingly well, women in high school, and then when they go into professions, they are, in Israel also, I think maybe 20–30% go into sciences and engineering. And then also, you don't see them in entrepreneurship, or you see less of them.
Yeah, I think it's a sad fact of all over the world, but we need to improve
we need to promote this, and we are actively doing this, and there are specific programs, also, by the way, by the government, that if you are a woman, you will get some sort of preferential terms to start up your so everybody is aware that this is something that needs to be addressed.
You also say that a number of startups fail, a huge percentage. Makes me think, as former mathematician, what's the norm? Maybe they should fail in masses to bring good technology to society.
Absolutely.
Where is the norm?
Absolutely, Henrik. Startups are exactly the opposite of children. With a child, you need to support the weakest child the most. We start up, I don't want to use that word, but the weakest child, you need to discontinue this. And one of our challenges was that we were never able to discontinue, or it was extremely difficult for us to discontinue. But I totally agree with you. There is no such thing as failure. For us, the experience that they gained in this hands-on training as entrepreneurs is critical. And this is, by the way, why the government supported it at the beginning. They gave, and each year they give $450 million to the riskiest startups you can think of. They will never, fund an R&D program which is, mediocre. They will not do an application, an internet app or something like this. So government funding goes only to the riskiest project, and some of this rain falls on the road and nothing grows, and some of it grows, falls on the land, and many great things, grow. And, we had the Lavi project. At some point, Israel decided to build its own, aircraft or fighter jet, and it failed. And, out of this break, so many startups came. So the issue of failure is, I agree with you, is a total misrepresentation.
So it's a lottery, and you have to buy tickets to be in.
Yes.
So let's thank Ben again.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Andrew. Oh, thank you very much.